1993, working at the University of Alberta Hospital, I get a ping from one of my managers saying, "Hey, what about this Apple Newton thing?" It's like, what's that?
When I saw it, I was like, this is it. This is like the future of computing. It's gonna be in your hand. You can take it everywhere. So I was very excited about the Newton.
I call it techno lust. I just had to have one.
There's a computer coming out that could be your personal digital assistant.
I first saw the Newton during the Apple Expo, which is the fair that was organized by Apple back in the day.
The Newton was supposed to go on sale Monday morning, but there was one saleswoman who announced that at 5 p.m. Friday, she would start selling Newtons. So at 4:59, she was on the phone with me, where I ordered the first Newton.
So I read about this and thought, oh, this is actually kind of cool.
Straight away, I just got it. I thought, this is amazing.
And it was like my companion throughout all 4 years of college.
And I used the Newton through my entire university career, taking notes.
I just loved that thing. I couldn't get my hands off of it.
People knew me as the guy with the Newton.
And this is our little green friend, right here. This is a Newton Message Pad 2100. This is the last one that was produced before it was killed. Very proud of this little guy. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to all of us, I think.
Well, now a new product developed by Apple Computer is called Newton. It is the computer giant's much ballyhooed product advance that it hopes will revolutionize the small personal computer field.
The beauty of it was that you could handwrite and you could scribble away, and it would turn all your scribble into text.
We just did things that no other company had done in technology at the time.
What a lot of people don't realize is that the Newton was one of the most profitable products that Apple ever had at the time.
There's still a vibrant community of Newton users using the product today, which is incredible.
That team, I have never seen a team like that.
Hello, my name is Taya, and yes, I do still frequently use my Newton 2000, which, conveniently, I can keep in my pocket. I was introduced to Newton technology after it had all been discontinued, but I recognized as soon as I saw it what I had dreamed about since I was a kid. It's an entire library that I can hold in one book and write anything that I want to on it. Events that I'm going to, people that I've met, notes in any subject. And no matter how bad and rushed my scribbling is, the Newton understands what I've written and allows me to rearrange my writing into beautiful documents that I can later search easily by word. I did, at one point, abandon my Newton because I was frustrated that it does not instantly sync with every other device in existence. That's a feature, not a bug. When I'm working with my Newton, then nothing can interfere. It is just my Newton and me.
This is Newton when I arrived at Apple, and this is the one that actually shipped.
Newton started as a very advanced stack of research. I used to describe the Newton project as stacking risk. We would take an entirely new RISC processor that was unbuilt and unproven, and then we would add an entirely new multi-threaded operating system that wasn't yet built and unproven, and then we would add an entirely new programming language that was only partially built, and then we would add diffuse infrared communications, which had never been done before, and on and on and on. And from an engineering point of view, that's incredibly exciting, but from a business point of view, it's completely crazy.
Remember, there was no digital cell phones. There was no World Wide Web.
And it was started by a guy named Steve Sackerman, who had worked on Mac hardware. He had just finished shipping the Mac 2 and so on, and he had decided that Apple was now becoming very boring because it was starting to ship these sort of rectangular gray plastic boxes. And he had left HP because he didn't want to ship rectangular plastic boxes. So he decided that he would leave Apple. And Jean-Louis Gasset convinced him to stay by promising him that he could do whatever he wanted, basically.
We had a name, we had the t-shirts, we probably even had the icons, but we had no idea what we were doing. I mean, that's the way you thought at Apple. You weren't bounded by normal gravity.
We were all thinking about Penbase, what it could mean in the abstract, you know, dreaming. We brought in Bose to tell us how in a portable slate-like computer, think of an iPad Pro size computer, much thicker, how we could put a subwoofer in it. We thought that that was a good idea, and it just shows you the lengths of where we were wrong.
One way to make your project never finish is to have it be a whole stack of completely new things. That's right. Fantasize about doing hardware. So this is an actual prototype that we had that was just, I mean, I guess it was probably made of wood or something, but it was the size and weight distribution of the thing that we thought we were making in 1988. And it had just a piece of plastic here, so you could take a screen, you could make a screenshot, and then you could print it out and stick it in there, just to imagine.
And in those days, that was pretty far out there because there really were no touchscreens, technologies that were commercially available.
It was just, if there was no feature that wasn't good enough to throw in this thing.
So we had to kind of scale that back to get things to actually work. We stole a lot of existing stuff from the rest of Apple and kind of rejiggered it, and you know, we kind of reduced our ambitions here and there. But back in '88, it was like everything is new.
We made a list of all the things that were brand new and serious technical risks.
When Michael Chow joined, he lost confidence in it, and luckily his office was next to mine. So on his way out, you know, 9 o'clock at night, he would stop and say, "Caps, do you think any of this is going to work?" And I said, you know, so we started to have doubts, and then we got Colbert involved.
What is this thing actually supposed to do? And there were little pieces of it before. There were, like, you could do a handwriting recognition demo, or you could do a drawing demo, or you know, various little sub components of it. But no one had ever seen a demo of the whole thing. Like, what is the point of the whole thing?
Alan Kay in 1968 did a mock-up of his Dynabook concept.
I worked in a group with Alan Kay on an object-oriented programming language called Smalltalk, and we also had the vision of something called the Dynabook, which was a portable, kind of tablet-sized device, not too different from what we have now, you know, sort of 50 years later in the iPad.
This is kind of the ancestor of both laptops and tablets. So you have the big screen, it's flat, with keys. There's a cassette on the side, which is meant to represent magnetic storage. There's a stylus in there. And he also wanted it to be wireless.
Steve had recruited Alan to Apple back in the early 1980s. So Alan came to me and he said, "John," he said, "next time we're not going to have Xerox PARC, Palo Alto Research Center." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, you know, Steve got all of his inventions came from Xerox, and we have them all. So what are we going to do next?" And I said, "Wow, so what do we do?"
You have 3 messages. Your graduate research team in Guatemala, just checking in.
I went to George Lucas and I said, "George, isn't there a way we can simulate these things of what a computer could be like in 20 years?
And your mother reminding you about your father.
Surprise birthday party next Sunday.
Because I didn't want people to think that Apple had lost its innovation, culture that had made it so distinctive when Steve was at the company.
The Knowledge Navigator video that Apple made internally is a kind of inspiring vision of the future. It was almost meant to be the way the Dynabook mock-up in '68 was trying to look way ahead, but also with a level of AI and voice recognition that, you know, people would die for today. I mean, it was still way, way out there.
here. This is our really old firm. Yeah, we've been making cognac in here, the French way, in this particular building for 100 years. The back of the building, and this room is, I call it my workshop. My co-workers call it my playground. One of the ideas was to develop a brand new ROM board and have the ROM board so we can reprogram it, so we can change the ROM, add functionality. With today's machines, they're so complex that you will never ever have a chance to see all the way through. The Newton is, the level of complexity for me of the Newton is just high enough to be super interesting and low enough to be able to understand the entire system. I did this by filing off the layers of the ROM board and redrawing all the circuits and reversing it into the complete schematics. By starting those projects or getting them at least to a point where they would theoretically work, to me the reward is that I understand that I figured out how it worked. It's the fun of reverse engineering. It's kind of a Sudoku with 2 million fields. I could send this out and hopefully get a functioning ROM board back. The flash chips are still available in museum shops and they could be used. I have no idea how popular the Newton was in Germany. During that time I was living in California, and so all versions I know are the English ones, and sometimes when I see a Newton in German it's very strange to me. Wenn ich es lache, werde ich sicher blau. Und lachte.
Bitte sehr. Ohne Brille bin ich auch. Bei mir genauso.
My first encounter with the Newton was when they gave me one. I was at this developer conference. I think the 120 had just seen the light of the day and they just probably wanted to get rid of these things. So they gave them out to the developers. That was the first time I've ever heard of this. Yeah, I was hooked. I was hooked about 5 minutes after I unpacked it. It's, I like the handwriting recognition. I like the whole idea that is behind the software. My first impression was, okay, these people want to make things easy for me. I don't know how this came about, but someone asked me if I could rebuild a battery pack for a 2100. After that I thought, okay, that wasn't that difficult, but it wasn't that easy either, so maybe it might be a good idea to let others participate in what I found out. And then I took these pictures, and this was really the first page on my website, the 2100 battery rebuild page. And after that, this somehow developed a life of its own. People asked me to rebuild this and to fix this and that. I didn't really do anything for this to happen. You know, my shed is getting a new roof. Like, this is when I noticed how much Newton stuff I do have. It's like boxes that size, that high, about 20. I will never in my whole life will I be able to sell all this something.
Yeah. But it's too much fun to give it up to.
Yeah, yeah.
John Sculley, he just said, I just don't understand what Newton is anymore. And so I went and made a HyperCard stack that kind of painted out a knowledge navigator vision of what Newton could be. And that's when he really started backing it.
This is the Newton team. I guess we were bored with t-shirts.
They had a mystique, they had a cachet, they were very sexy to be part of. So, you know, that was all about Newton at the time.
And so when Newton started, it was like, Apple is really successful. Let's carve off a little place where we can do something crazy. But the problem was, after a few years, the rest of Apple started having difficulties because the margins started to go down. And they were looking around for, now what? And they were like, what about this Newton thing?
You know, the hype machine started. John Sculley needed something to hang his hat on, you know, his Macintosh.
It wasn't really ready for that because it wasn't supposed to be that. Oh my gosh, look at that. I think that's a Giugiaro prototype.
In the case of Newton, we had a lot of work done on a large screen device and then started working in parallel to create a smaller, lower price point device.
It was when the $8,000 Newton was recognized as not going to work.
John Sculley issued the mandate that it had to fit inside a men's suit pocket. And at one point we went to Men's Warehouse and we bought like half a dozen suits, trying to find the largest pocket we could possibly find. But after we shipped it, we then resurrected some of the work and refreshed some of the work to do a larger screen Newton. This one was codenamed Cadillac.
There was a competition, a design competition. So you can see we've switched to diffuse infrared wireless networking.
The idea was that if we all came into a conference room together with our Newton tablets, we would just instantly make a wireless network that we would share.
This was back when we thought there's no way anyone's going to ever allow you to use a radio Wi-Fi LAN in an airplane. So you're going to need something that's not radio.
Now today that sounds silly because we live in a world of Wi-Fi, but you have to roll the clock back 24 years and think how profound that would have been. This product never shipped, but it got pretty far along.
Marketer's dream, engineer's nightmare.
Successive generations of the hardware, they got more and more like the real device. So it was a board with an umbilical, then it became a board with the real screen, but it was a big board. Those are called bun warmers. Eventually you got the real stuff, but it was right at the last few months that you got real hardware. It was kind of fun to work that way.
Now the Newton comes in this kind of format, like basically a 6-inch screen, hard to see in this kind of light. The beauty of it was that you could handwrite and you could scribble away and it would turn all your scribble into text. So then it became much more natural to start using it in a meeting. My day is 80% meetings. If you take a laptop in, you're hiding behind the screen. It's really hard to type and still engage in the conversation around you. Whereas with a screen like this, you can just turn it into ink and you can just scribble notes as you would on a normal notepad. But you don't have to scan it or anything like that. You just put it straight through. And if you want to get it recognised, you can do that after the fact as well. After about 3 or 4 weeks of using this, I've gone from 1.5 hours use out of this to about 6 hours use every day. But when I discovered the technology, I was going, this is great, why isn't everybody using it? Well, it doesn't matter to me whether it's islanded and people have discontinued it. I just want to get the use out of it. So I just bought a few units, realised that this is, it has been discontinued. Well, in that case, I better buy more than 1 unit. My wife sees it, she goes, that's so cute, I want one too. I said, you're not getting your hands on my one. Yeah, I'll buy you one. And the kids are into it now because they're writing on it. They don't get to write on their laptops that they take to school. It's cute, and it's quite limited because you don't get the distraction of the internet.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Cédric Sartou. Je suis collectionneur Apple depuis quelques années et j'ai découvert il y a peu le magnifique Apple Newton. Je vis en France et plus exactement en Auvergne, siège de l'entreprise Michelin. Cette entreprise est connue notamment pour ses pneumatiques. D'ailleurs, vous pouvez voir derrière moi une ancienne piste d'essai de ces pneumatiques. Mais cette entreprise est également connue pour ses itinéraires routiers. Saviez-vous que dans les années 90, cette entreprise innovante, alliée à la technologie Apple, a donné naissance à un programme d'un guide interactif de Paris que voici. Ça vous dit de visiter Paris à bord de mon Newton? Alors, suivez-moi.
Alors moi c'est un petit peu plus d'1 an, un petit peu par hasard suite à un échange de matériel Apple en tant que collectionneur. Et puis je suis tombé sous le charme. Donc là il suffit de refaire itinéraire en fait ici, de choisir à pied plus métro. Donc où se situe l'Arc de Triomphe. Donc on peut l'apercevoir ici sur la carte.
C'est difficile à expliquer, justement, c'est la magie qu'il y a dans le Newton, quoi. Des 2000-2100, j'en ai 12 fonctionnels, une vingtaine à peu près en morceaux.
Bienvenue dans l'univers Newton. Ses possibilités sont insoupçonnées. Mais pour mieux le comprendre et mieux l'utiliser, il faut connaître quelques petits trucs que je vais vous apprendre.
Puis toutes les versions ne sont pas sorties en français en plus.
Non, jusqu'à la 120, c'est tout. Newton OS 2, il n'a pas été en français. Il a été francisé après pour un projet qui s'appelle Watson. C'était un projet médical.
Oui, pour les médecins français, oui.
Ouais, j'en ai 5.
Ah oui. D'accord. Donc nous voici à la Défense avec sa fameuse grande arche que l'on voit ici.
Allez, les cartons comme ça. J'ai passé, je sais pas, à peu près 3 ans sur eBay à acheter tout ce que je voyais.
I talked about the future was going to be these handheld products that would have no keyboard, that would be able to communicate wirelessly, that would have an intelligent agent inside of them, that would be able to do smart things. And I never mentioned the name Newton, but I said that this was going to be a gigantic industry, and these products would eventually be sold in the billions. And there was just like, complete incredulous response. They said, this marketing guy is overhyping it, and this makes no sense.
I felt like Newton had multiple launches, to be honest.
This is also the first appearance of the Newton logo.
We had the kind of announcement of Newton and the category with John Sculley at CES in 1992.
So I think this is the original technology launch press kit. No, it is.
It was literally 2 minutes before the keynote speech that John Sculley was scheduled to deliver. And he turned to Michael Chow and he said, I like personal digital assistant. Let's go with PDA.
See, it doesn't say anything specific because there is nothing specific. This didn't exist. This was like an early prototype.
So that was kind of the first hill on the emotional roller coaster that is Newton.
Suddenly it became much more serious. Like you can't just mess around for 5 years. You actually have to ship something kind of now.
So when we pre-announced the product and the category, that really started a stopwatch for the team.
This is the 93 script, I think, the actual launch. The unit we're holding is a message pad. Do not call it Junior or the thing or the device. Practice writing a few words that you know you have luck with.
This is a computer you write with, right? You can write with it. It can recognize your handwriting. You can also write little notes on it. It organizes, it captures ideas, and it communicates. And perhaps communication is one of the big ideas.
Everything in Newton was time compressed. Everything was a fire drill, an emergency. I think when you opt into Apple or you opt into a group like Newton, you know it's going to be incredibly challenging and you want that. And it didn't disappoint.
The longer you go between announcing a brilliant concept to actually shipping the first iteration, which is always going to be less than your full vision, those expectations just built and built and built. And by the time we shipped the first product, it was more expensive than we thought, it was heavier than we thought, the battery life was shorter than we thought, the handwriting recognition wasn't quite as good as we thought. All of those forces of gravity, if you'll excuse the pun, I think hurt us.
They were saying this is going to replace what you're using now, when it was still relatively unproven early products.
I think we knew what Newton could be, and we had been living in the future for so long, living with the best and brightest researchers at Apple, that we misjudge the distance from the present to the future. The idea of beaming is something that you still cannot do today. I can't easily send my business card to you from our smartphones, but that's something that Newton was doing back in 1993.
The original Newton that came out was a wonderful prototype. It was not a product that should have ever been shipped. And but Sculley had said to the team, we are going to ship the Newton at Macworld in August, and what they put out was, unfortunately, a flawed product.
We were so in love with the future, and we so saw these post-PC device use cases, doctors and nurses carrying around a dedicated tablet, industrial uses, consumer uses.
After the pen bubble collapsed, so Newton, the Go EO, failed in the market, over $1 billion of investment evaporated. A lot of those ideas didn't get wasted, a lot of the software and technology, but you can see them as coming back in the form of cheaper accessory devices.
When you live in the future, you also need a roadmap to get there, and I think that's where maybe we tripped up a little bit.
All success comes out of failures. And you can easily become a victim of your own success. I mean, Microsoft and Intel were remarkably successful during the 1990s. They dominated the personal computer industry by then, but both of them missed mobile.
What we sometimes forget is the iPhone is only 11 or 12 years old. That's all it is. And before that, the phones were horrible and to by today's standard. And when the Newton came out, the screen was revolutionary. The whole thing, the braveness of not putting a keyboard on it was fantastic. I think the only comparable device that existed was a Sharp, where you could enter addresses that had like a 4-line display. And that was the only remotely comparable device. There was just no other device out there.
It was really going to take, ultimately, about 15 years for the hardware to get powerful enough to be able to do the things that you really wanted to be able to do in software.
This was an era when most people didn't even have a PC at home.
When Apple created Macintosh, when Apple created Newton, we were still an entrepreneurial company. We were huge risk takers. People were dreamers.
These ideas float around and they come up again and again, and most of the time they don't stick. It's the ones that do stick that we see, oh, okay, there's a laptop, there's a tablet. You know, there's kind of a soup and things come up, and most of the time, yeah, nothing.
So let's see if we can get this Japanese one fired up. I focus a lot on kind of the esoteric stuff that nobody's ever seen before. You see it's Japanese, it says J. I have a lot of prototypes, I have a lot of development units, a lot of documentation. We were there during the launch. When I first held that thing in my hand, it was fascinating. It was like totally unlike anything else I'd ever seen. This is the Newton hardware on a NuBus card, and then you would debug it with software on the Mac. This is like my pride and joy, this one, the clear case eMate. Functionally, it's exactly the same as an eMate, it's just the clear case is what they used to, they were testing how the cases would perform when they were doing the molding. I'm still discovering technology that Apple licensed under the Newton name that people never realized that turned out to be a device that some other company was selling as a product. You'd think after all this time, we'd know everything there would be out there. I'm learning stuff. You get a really vital fan base for something, and people will find a way to keep it viable, keep it alive. Some of this ephemeral stuff actually needs to be saved. How do you know where you're going if you don't know where you came from? Nobody thought this stuff would still be running today, but it does. I mean, I'm running a web server right here. Since it's been installed on this device, I've had almost 780,000 hits. It's crazy. You shouldn't be able to run a web server on a Newton anyway. The software that was written to do that is 15 years old. There's an attachment that a lot of people have to keeping things going as long as they can, just for the sake of proving other people wrong. I think that's a big part of it too. I like proving people wrong.
I
was driving on 280 late at night, and I got pulled over. And the officer said, you know, have you been drinking? I said, no, I'm just really tired. Well, where do you work? I work at Apple. And he's like, oh, okay, I'll escort you home.
Look how young everybody is. That's crazy. I'm always in the back.
So who is in the small photo that somebody's holding?
Oh, that's Ko.
Oh.
Ko Isono. You know the story of Ko if you went to talk to Caps, probably.
Yeah, I actually worked with him with music software before, and that was his entree in there. You know, he had some issues that we didn't know about at the time, and then he ended up taking his own life, and it was just, again, you put yourself back into this. How did we ever survive as a group?
People don't realize how stressful it can be trying to hit launch dates, trying to keep up with high expectations. When you're working on a team of exceptionally talented people.
There were a lot of heroic days. There were also a lot of tough days. There were days of just exhaustion and depression and frustration.
That was, you know, a very sad time for all of us.
I think about that, the whole Newton group going to a funeral in the pouring rain and then coming back and going to work. You know, I don't think the fact that he was working crazy hours caused anything. I'm sure it contributed. It was much more of a familial, he got married without his parents' permission. He was living in the US without his parents' permission. And unfortunately in the US he had access to guns. But I wished, in retrospect, of course, for his sake, that we weren't working quite so hard and were a little more attuned with things to have prevented it. It was crazy.
You have a lot of apps on the phone, but they all stand side by side. Whereas on the Apple Newton, the way it was done is everything is connected together. And it is under that you have the idea of an assistant that knows about all the things that are going on.
Well, Newton Intelligence is, you might think of as the operating system in Newton, but we don't call it the operating system. There are two key reasons. One is because Newton Intelligence incorporates more than what would be traditionally considered a personal computer operating system.
This is what the Newton did, built in. It would take your handwriting, understand the context of your calendar, your address book, your email, and allow you to tap the assist button and get help setting up a meeting or faxing a document or sending an email. And that's exactly what Siri and Alexa and Cortana are trying to do today with voice.
For example, the iPad, that there is something like Siri where you can ask things, but you can also see it's done with a lot of horsepower, and there are a lot of layers that make this work, and the Newton was very elegant.
It was my computer for years. The perfect assistant. Cheap too.
The fact that the iPhone is so app-centric just still kills me. At least on the Newton, it wasn't the home screen. You had to open the drawer and get out a tool that you wanted to use. In the original vision, Michael and I wanted no apps. We wanted one app, which was the notepad. But then we got back into apps that really worked well together. So that whole app centricity versus data centricity, I think people are the thing that's important, not applications.
The Newton was definitely about people first.
So it's a combination of, Cap's attention to that sort of detail, the tactile level, and Marge's, kind of quirky icons and that sort of thing that's made it fun and not an IBM product for sure.
You had the Sharp organizer on one end, which was Joe Friday, just the fax ma'am. And then you had General Magic that was too cute, and we wanted to have some amount of animation, some amount of fun in the sound effects, but not enough to get in your way. The first time I did the effect where it crumpled up the paper and tossed it in the wastebasket, I felt it was too cute, but people really loved it. And you'd give demos to people and they would say, do that again, do that again, do that again. And you'd be sitting there throwing stuff away.
The clipboard, I love the clipboard on Newton. And there's no equivalent. And you could even have several clipboards. And on iOS you don't have this, it doesn't work this way.
That sort of
what normal people call obsession with details really does matter in software.
Oh wow. That is the thing that was in that picture. It's lost its logo, but it would look just like the one in that backpack. So when I arrived in the Newton team in mid-1988, that's what a Newton looked like. So the very first words ever recognized by Newton in public, or rather not recognized, it works. Wow. That came out as Sell Bob about mixing, but I don't think anybody noticed.
You couldn't get a better team than we had on the Newton. So you can imagine the frustration when the product couldn't render the paragraph software successfully, and people started to make jokes about the handwriting recognition. And here you've got some of the most brilliant computer scientists ever doing breakthrough stuff that no one has ever seen before, and we're getting slammed in the press, because the handwriting recognition didn't work that well.
The major problem, I think, was the Newton was overhyped. Apple created very high expectations. Newton was a very exciting device. I liked it very much. And I have to admit that Evernote had been inspired by Newton.
They had been working along with this recognizer, assuming a decent-sized dictionary. And at the very near the end, they were told, by the way, you can only have 10,000 words in your dictionary because we have to fit it all into ROM, and we have a very tight space. That's what really gave birth to the egg freckles phenomenon. It would always find a word. It's just that the word came from a list of only 10,000 of them, and that usually was not the word you wrote.
This one air lit? That's not what I wrote.
That was not Paragraph's fault. That was imposed on them by the Newton team, I'm afraid.
And a lot of people formed very strong impressions about the Newton based on press coverage and things like Doonesbury making fun of the handwriting recognition. But the percentage of people who actually ever touched a Newton back in that day was really small.
There's the original.
This is the original.
Yeah.
Cool.
Gary Trudell never even played with the Newton. He was doing it all based on anecdotal information that he got. But it kind of doomed us for a while in that people looked at it as a very flawed product.
I think the Doonesbury cartoons actually capture a moment in time really well. It was just a representation of the general consumer malaise that was building around the product, that, hey, it's not a business tool, it doesn't run my spreadsheets, and it's also, occasionally screwing up on my handwriting. What am I supposed to do with this?
When Trudeau slammed us with the cartoon, my wife is the one that figured out how to get a hold of Trudeau. She calls this number expecting to talk to a secretarial type person, but it was Gary Trudeau himself. He just answered the phone, "Studio!" And she said, "Oh, hi, I'm Marie D'Amico. I'd like to talk to Mr. Trudeau." "So, what do you want?" And so she had to explain what she wanted an Easter egg was. He had no idea. But as soon as he got it, he goes, "Oh yeah, sure." So he drew that cartoon for us. But the fun part of that was I couldn't tell anybody. I had to go to great efforts to hide it, so I hid it inside a font, and nobody figured it out. But then right before we shipped, one of the engineers figured it out. But he was wise enough. He knew what it was, And he contacted me and he says, can I talk about this? And I said, no.
The print recognizer, the Newton's original print recognizer, survives to this day in Mac OS X, or now Mac OS. To prevent clutter in the user interface, you don't even see an ink preference pane unless you attach a graphics tablet. But if you attach a graphics tablet, suddenly there's an ink preference pane in the system preferences. There are Easter eggs in the Newton version. If you write my email handle, Larry Y, so 2 Y's on the end, 3 times in a row, recognized correctly, it would say something like, hello worker, from a Firesign Theater reference. So that survived into the Mac. My supervisor came to me with this edict that we had to remove it from the Mac, that this was not Apple policy to have Easter eggs anymore. And it was nonsense. There's Easter eggs everywhere, and they have been there since the Apple I. So I removed it, which means I buried it under one more layer. If you write egg, 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 and get it recognized correctly, it turns it on, and all the old ones come back. So they're revealed in public.
There was always this magic in the handwriting recognition, and when it worked, it was, you know, a beautiful thing.
I believe the most favorite thing I enjoyed was the handwriting recognition. The first unit, when I got the very first unit, it was somewhat poor, but as it developed into 2.0 and 2.1, I really enjoyed it because it was fairly accurate. If you look at the iPhone 6s Plus I have here, it's a really awesome unit. Unfortunately, some things, you know, just don't transcribe from the Newton to here. And the handwriting for me would be, it just seems natural. There's something about it for me that writing really transcribes and helps my memory retain it. And I noticed that when I have my kids use the eMates, the same thing.
It's my daughter saying her ABCs.
The writing was the most intriguing item for them because it sort of was tactile and connected for them.
It's just something about writing on something. You write on this and it changes your handwriting to text. And it's just, there's just no way to describe how cool that is.
If you look back, iPhones and things like that have got about 90-95% there. Do you know what I mean? It's only another 5% to be able to provide handwriting recognition services across the board, because a lot of the technology is already there.
This is the print recognizer in its youth, the Rosetta project, and all those things around the border are the weights used in the neural network. It's the core of the classifier.
So we're looking at software on your back.
That's right. I've gotten really interested in neural networks. Let's see if we can do handwriting recognition. And so I did. And that's how I got on to what became the print recognizer in the Newton. We pulled together a really good group of people, and I think produced basically what I'm embarrassed to say it, but I mean, I'm also proud to say it, the world's first usable handwriting recognition system, and that's what people called it. I kept a copy of that Doonesbury strip on my wall to remind myself what we didn't want to do. We didn't want to release something that wasn't going to work, but then we've been hoping to get into the Newton and try to do something good for it, and they've been saying no. We burned some ROMs with our recognizer instead of the other one, and from what I understand, Steve Capps took that Newton home, and he was like, gosh, this seems to be working. And he gave it to his wife, and she started feeling, she's, Dave, this works. And I think it was as of that moment that they decided we would be in. You're training these neural networks by giving it samples of the handwriting and telling it what it's supposed to be at the outcome. So this is supposed to be an A, this is supposed to be an E, this is supposed to be a Z. What you're telling it is the output is this vector that is a 1, true, everywhere for the letter it's supposed to be. So you get a 1 in the A column if it's supposed to be an A, and all the rest of the letters are there and getting a 0. Now if you think about that, you have 1 1 and 112 zeros. And then you get the next sample and you get a different 1 and 112 zeros. So basically what the net learns early on is shut down. What if we, not fully, but partially balance that pressure towards on and off? It actually hurt the accuracy on the individual character accuracy by an infinitesimal amount, and it cut our word error rate in half. Because the second and third choice possibilities would now come up with reasonable probabilities.
This handwriting recognition artificial intelligence is very close to what we have today, what we call deep learning and so on. So it's just an extension of the same technology going further, because Lara Yeager used neural networks, which is the same technology in deep learning and all the computer vision improvement for the last 5 years.
I think their long-term vision was in the right place, just the technology was not quite ready for supporting that. So you think of the pen will be kind of a keyboard replacement was, I think, a lot of the thinking at the time. What surfaced is not quite that. It's that the pen has its own unique complementary strengths, and a lot of them are actually being able to spatialize, so being able to, whether it's diagram or create complex symbology.
A pen is so natural, it's so natural. With this technology, with this hardware, we are close to bring this handwriting as a natural input between the human and the machine.
The more modalities you engage during an action, the more durable and the deeper the learning process is.
Typing was very unnatural, so to have the Newton be this electronic paper was just ideal. It's a very different relationship with the whole world of recording things.
So how would I have used this? I guess I would have taken notes.
It's interesting to me that this is kind of what we have now with something like the iPad Pro.
It is.
And it's at least 20 years since the last Newton.
Yeah. It's important to remember that this is a piece of wood. And the hard part is the software.
You look at the tablet nowadays, all the things that are on there are disconnected. There's a little bit of like a layer that makes you think this is one coherent device. But what I think is missing is indeed the holistic approach the Apple Newton had.
You could link everything to everything and all different kinds of software on your Newton. On the name card, you had it would show you where the appointments were, you know, through more info. You had everything integrated.
It was made that there is no big distinction into what programs I have running. It was what was put into the foreground is what you would want to do with the Newton.
Well, that was the beauty of it, you know. The operating system got out of the way. It just said, okay, here's what you want to do, go do it. It was so elegant.
I'm kind of imagining back in like the 1890s, 1900s, 1910. There was no steering wheel, there were no gas pedals, and every car manufacturer is trying to figure out how do you do steering, how do you do acceleration, and some of them had levers and some of them had pedals, you steered with the pedals. So the Newton is maybe the tail end of some of the good old days of crazy language experimentation.
This is the way you thought back then, which is I have to design the entire OS. In fact, we designed the language around these constraints. You know, if I must say so myself, it was a very elegant design. And sadly, its time has passed because you don't really need to do that because memory is so cheap and so vast now. This forced simplicity makes the decision so obvious at times. You just say, well, then that's the right way to do it.
On the Newton, you could have your app could kind of almost do anything with the system that it wanted. It could kind of go and poke into other applications and do things. So it was really kind of a hacker's dream, hacker in the good sense, because you could really just create amazing things with it. But we can't allow that today.
So if you were a programmer and you didn't like something on the Newton, you could change it.
This is before there were bad people. So Newton security is not that great.
Everybody was much more trusting and naive back then, but we advertised this as a feature that you could install a piece of software and it had full access to the address book.
As opposed to nowadays where everything is all the apps are totally walled off. Like they can't even tell the other app is even there.
But on one hand, in the hippie, how the internet was made, you know, kind of the 60s counterculture that computers came from, It makes perfect sense.
What would the world have been like if prototype inheritance had taken off? The Newton is probably the best and only real try that it got in its purest form. There's so much craziness from the old days that got lost, and there's so much to be learned from the stuff that didn't make it.
How was morale after the initial launch?
The morale after the initial launch of Mac was a lot worse. Unlike the Mac, we had seen what would have been the ARM9. We saw a better recognizer, we saw a better experience. So we were actually, I think, pretty excited.
It really was quite remarkable because when I got there, I didn't know what to expect, because usually an engineering team, when a product fails that as visibly as it did, you would expect the engineering team to be down. Wasn't the case at all.
Newton 2.0 was so much better than 1.0 that, I was thrilled to be able to get my hands on it.
That's a testament to the engineers. I mean, the engineers were really dedicated to making it a really good product.
To me, the 2000 was the first machine that barely made what the vision was. Because the handwriting was that much better, it was a much faster chip.
The reviews on the rewritten operating system were phenomenal, but every review had the word debacle in it. It was, from the debacle of Newton, they've come up with a new version and this one's pretty good, They couldn't let it go that it was, as bad a failure as it was. We were moving along to 2.0, but the Macintosh business was not doing well at that time. Before Gil came in, Spindler told me to sell it off. And so we went looking for buyers. He wanted to keep 51% control, but he wanted the other party to pick up all expenses going forward. And that broke the deal. And we did it again. We went out, we found other people who were interested in buying it, but Apple couldn't let it go. The team put together a presentation to spin it out. So we showed them a business plan where we could be profitable in 18 months, and a lot of that was based on the eMate. At that time, Apple was very big into education. A couple of school systems came to Apple and said, the problem that we have is that your computers are too expensive. And so we can only put 2 or 3 in a classroom. We'd love it if we could get 8 or 10 in a classroom and they'd be portable and the kids could take them home. Sales came to us with the problem and said, Mac Group says they can't do this. Can you do this? And since we were all solid state, we didn't have a rotating disk, we were black and white, so we didn't have to worry about color screens. And we had an operating system that you could write apps on top of, but there had to be a keyboard. So we came up with the design for the eMate and worked with Jonathan Ives' group to come up with a cool industrial design. And it was a very cool industrial design. In fact, Steve stole a lot of the ideas for the iMac and other things that came later. We were looking good. We thought we knew what we had to do to be successful, but this team was so committed to it that when we left, we took 95% of the people with us. Newton 2.0 was a good product, and we had ideas to make it a great product. And I think we would have gotten there if we had gotten a little bit longer runway, but business intruded. Apple needed successes at that time.
Did I demo you throwing it on the ground?
No.
Oh, okay. That's what I used to do with the eMate. I would look how rugged this is, and I just drop it to the ground. I would not do that with an iPad.
Kind of around late 95, early 96, I realized, that we were Icarus and we had gotten a little too close to the sun. And it became a little bit of a gallows humor place, from what I understand it. That infamous video of the modems. You can see people not working very hard in that video.
Give me, coming through, video camera! Reporters would come to me and say, so what's it mean for you that Jobs is back? And I said, well, it doesn't mean anything to us. We're a separate company now. I haven't heard from Steve at all. He's been back 4 weeks. I haven't even gotten an email from him. So I think we're in good shape. That didn't last.
Steve Jobs had just given like a keynote at Macworld, maybe Boston, somewhere like that. And like the next day, I like saw him at one of his favorite sushi places in Palo Alto, Hama's Brown Rice Sushi. And that was right next to this Printers Inc. bookstore where we had our Newton User Group meetings, or like weekly, bi-weekly Newton User Group meetings. So I remember I said, "Hey, great speech." And he's like, "Thanks," as he got in this car and drove off. And that night, I wrote to him an email saying, you know, I'm a big Newton developer, you know, we're kind of concerned about what's happening. What's up? And he actually wrote a response back to me saying, you know, the Newton has a bright future, and we're, you know, especially like the eMate, and we're like applying more resources to help it make it better. Adam, the eMate has a bright future, and it is for this reason that I'm pulling it back into Apple, which has the resources to market and sell it much more broadly. You can imagine that a small spin-off company would not have such a large sales force or marketing budget. With the appropriate investments in sales and marketing, we hope that the eMate can become a great success. We are a little more confused about the message pad. Since it costs more, $1,000 or more versus $700 to $799 for the eMate, and has no keyboard, its market seems more limited than the eMate. However, sales of the current message pad are brisk, so who knows? What do you think? Don't worry. We are pulling this group back into Apple so that we can invest even more sales and marketing resources into these products, rather than dumping the products into a small spin-off which lacks such resources. Best, Steve. But then a few months later, you know, end of February 1998, the word came out that Newton was being canceled, and they had this short press release.
He asked me to come and do a presentation on the Newton business. And I had heard from people, don't have a bunch of slides, you know, just go in with 4 slides, 5 slides, tell your story. If he likes your story, you'll be fine. I never even got to talk.
At that point, we're like, oh no, what's gonna happen? You know, Newton is dead.
For me, I think it was inevitable, but of course always sad to see something come to an end.
For me, it was just extreme depression or sense of disappointment and anger at Steve Jobs. How could you do this?
Microsoft taught us that products really don't become usable until version 3. You know, you could certainly say that about Windows, and you know, Newton never got permission to get past version 2.
We ended up using the Newtons to configure functional electrical stimulation devices for people that have got drop foot or paralyzed hands or stuff like that. Just before we're ready to go to production, we had ordered a bunch of Newtons, and then they said, last buy, that's it guys, we're done.
A number of people that we had done development work for, you know, said things like, we'll never base a product on an Apple platform again because they just got burned so badly by it.
And my theory is the problem was that Newton had Sculley's fingerprints on it. Because anything that had Sculley's fingerprints on it was Newt.
There was a lot of messages going across the internet saying that we have to do something about this.
19 years ago is when we had the Newton protest. It was on, I don't know, February 28th, a little after February 28th, 1998, shortly after they canceled the Newton. I think it was right here, and I was like talking to the crowd that was assembled right around there. And there's like a photo of me. I'd like called the police and like told them, you know, we're gonna have this protest. I called some news stations, I think, and alerted Apple as well. And they're like, okay, you can do that. And so we had about, I like to say it was about 100, but it was maybe like 70 people or so that were there. And some people actually created little picket signs. I was actually wearing a suit back then. I would not wear that again today. This is the new me. I think I gave a little speech about, you know, it's great technology, it's like the future, you know, don't just kill it, why don't you sell the technology?
A couple of Newtons were hooked at the front door the evening before the protest, Thursday evening, in just anger at Steve.
My own favorite conspiracy theory is that around this time, Bill Gates provided some investment money to Apple. Did he say, well, as a condition of our partnership here, we wouldn't mind it if you guys, kind of killed off the Newton. Who knows?
They sent down a little, I don't know, a tray of stuff for the Newton fans to eat to placate us, because obviously they were going to bring back the Newton, so they decided to feed us.
It was less about cutting expenses as it was about redirecting talent. And Jobs, he said that in public, and I think he meant it. And if you look, okay, this is the eMate, the Newton clamshell for education. Inexpensive, beautiful design. Just sleek. Looks like a Ferrari or a Lotus or something. Really a gorgeous computer. This is almost exactly what they came out with the first, they call iBook, I think. It was exactly this kind of curvy, gorgeous clamshell laptop computer. And you could tell the same people worked on it. Jobs got all that engineering and design capability by shutting down the Newton. So even though I hated like the dickens to see the Newton go away, and I am to this day convinced they could have saved the Newton, perhaps it wasn't profitable enough to justify the talent that was being expended on it.
I give him all the credit in the world for doing that. I think if he didn't come back, Apple would have been a relic of history at this point. But he came back, he focused the company, he did some things that I disagreed with that worked out. He was smarter than I was on a lot of things, and Apple became, a force that no one expected at the time when he came back. So.
The folks at work that morning looked at me and said, well, where are you going to go with this? I said, I'm going to keep on going. And they were a little afraid because they saw that I was very involved with it throughout the years. And I just sat back and I said, I have no fear.
There really weren't any other good alternatives out there. I kept working on it, maybe partly in denial. I'm still actually was earning some income because there was a very loyal user base of people who really said, you have to pry this Newton out of my cold dead fingers. They were really very loyal.
That sort of us against the world thing was there even before the Newton was cancelled, but then once it was cancelled, that was like, we're going to keep using this thing. This is the best device I've ever had. There's no way I'm giving this up. I'll use it until it dies, and then I'll use my backup one after that.
So I launched a blog called Newton Poetry with it, kind of documented my tinkering and documented the community. Lo and behold, there were all kinds of crazy people just like me out there.
It's amazing that so many people feel like I do about it, and my passion is driven by them.
My impression is that people have a tendency to come back to the Newton because it's something they can now afford. I think I have sold 5 or 6 eMates in the last 6 months. Oh, really? Wow. Which I didn't really expect.
If you own a Newton, you're setting yourself up to be a part of a small, weird community.
It's just a nice community. I think Newton users are just nice people. I've never seen a Newton user who's an idiot.
It was the nexus, it seemed, of the community. Some company, they ran a website called Planet Newton. The list was very active, but it became obvious that whoever was running that site, there was nobody at the wheel. And I figured out that they had not made it very secure, and I managed to just send it the right commands to give me a list of all the subscribers. And then it went down for good, like their servers went down. So the original was NewTontalk.com. I had registered NewTontalk.net, set it up, and sort of resubscribed everybody from this list and went, hi, we've taken over, hope that's okay. And it was pretty much like, yeah, okay, great, thanks. Kind of like a bloodless coup or something like that. I say the list grew from there. The list is decades old, yeah. Anybody who's using it is on there.
I took it over in 2001. People know me as the list dad. I felt it was necessary to step in and keep that going, back when we had almost 2,000 members on the list. And I think we're hovering around 1,000 right now, but still, that's pretty impressive for a list that's been around that long for a platform that everybody thinks is dead.
NewTontalk was the thing that kept those people together and aware of each other. They wouldn't have known of each other otherwise. I wouldn't have known Matthias if it hadn't been for NewTontalk.
Apple fans at the time were very devoted, and I think they still are today.
Persnickety, stubborn bunch we are.
Wow, you guys are still talking about this stuff? And we'd be like, yeah, we are, because it's awesome.
My Apple Newton collection is about 45 units. I have all of them. Last year I create Apple Newton users worldwide map on Google, and I sent an email for on our group NewTontalk. At this moment we have about 200 people on that map. It's really great to see that there is many people who are interested in that technology still.
That crazy French guy that was doing the emulators and all that stuff and still had conferences, and Walter I think actually went to one.
So this is from 1992, and this is, we printed these giant posters telling you all about how fabulous Newton technology was, or in reality was going to be.
Did you ever attend a worldwide Newton conference?
I did. Walter Smith and I showed up. Yeah, and we did a little fireside chat.
And? Was it everything you dreamed it would be?
I didn't know what to expect. I mean, this was long after the product was, no longer, supported by Apple.
Yes, I think it's really crazy that people are still into it all these years later.
I think I was blown away at the amount of engineering, crowdsourced engineering that has happened to reverse engineer a lot of the Newton OS, to port it to Linux and other hardware devices, and it just really touched me that there's that much energy, and it's a testament to what has happened with the internet, that like-minded people can organize so effectively, and through that the Newton can live on. It was really cool.
There's one interesting activity at the moment going on where the Apple Newton software is being emulated, and you can run the Apple Newton software on an iPad.
A French developer, Paul Guyot, he created the Newton, kind of the Einstein Newton emulator.
This is Einstein 2006.
Nice one.
I've got it here.
When Paul Guyot released Einstein, I was like, yes!
Basically, we're going to merge the Newton technologies with the host technologies, the Linux technologies, and the Newton data with the host data.
Did you ever expect it to be a usable kind of version of the Newton OS on modern devices?
I know many users wanted this to happen and run on new hardware, and it was more or less a promise, so I would say yes. But of course it would have required more work to improve the power. I'm not sure I ever believed in the ability to really escape from the Newton because of copyright, for example, and to make it a new handled. But some users wanted to believe, that's true.
Maybe we should schedule an Einstein developer meeting at your place, maybe twice a year or something.
Twice a year, great.
When Apple and the iPhone had this big battle with Samsung, which turned into a patent battle, they of course looked at their portfolio and said, oh crap, these guys violate, all these Newton patents. And it was just always that little bit of irony, because Steve, did not like Newton and made sure everybody knew that. So it would be kind of like I always would want to say, hey, Steve, should I go to this deposition your lawyers are asking me to? It was more of a patting myself on the back saying, yeah, we did a lot of good stuff. I wish Steve appreciated it more.
What is very exciting is people building on top of this, digging your work and continuing and enjoying it.
You know what this is, and this is what it runs now. This is Einstein on iPhone, and I'll show you this is not a fake.
The biggest disappointment was when we were trying to get Einstein onto the iOS devices. The Apple Store flat out refused to put it in. They said, first of all, we don't allow emulators, then you can't emulate anything Apple. And I think that's ridiculous. What's so bad about showing an old piece of history that was really great? The second attempt they said again, no way. That's the point where I gave up iOS development altogether and moved over to Android. It's actually when I sold all my iOS devices and bought Android devices. It would be wonderful if Apple at some point could say, you know what, we really don't do anything with this anymore, just do whatever you like. And I think after over 20 years it would be time to do that and to say that.
This is what AT&T does with their secret documents. They put them in bright red covers, like Christmas. But this is for the processor that we did not use. The hardware was out of sync with the software, so it was highly optimized for a kind of software that we then decided we weren't going to do. And then it became an exercise in trying to adapt the software to it, which became very frustrating. And then that plus some business stuff that happened with AT&T is why we ended up switching to the ARM processor, which is a really beautiful processor.
We started to have doubts, and then we got Colbert involved. And Colbert said, you know, the thing that we're using as the I/O processor is a really good chip, which was the ARM. Why don't we just use that?
Newton decided to go with ARM, and that was the right choice. The ARM processor was a much better processor than the Hobbit processor.
What a lot of people don't realize is that the Newton was one of the most profitable products that Apple ever had at the time. Everyone said, gee, Newton failed. But Newton was also the reason why ARM ended up being a commercial product. It was the architecting of the ARM to be a low-powered microprocessor that could handle a floating point and objects that led to the ARM becoming, now it's in about 1 billion different mobile devices.
Well, the legacy of that Newton chip, I think, is profound. And it's in most of the smartphones in people's pockets around the globe.
What kept the doors open and made the payroll was that Gil Amelio sold the 43% of ARM for $800 million and used that to keep Apple going, and to part of it was used to buy Next and bring Steve Jobs back to Apple.
I think the main reason is not so much the Newton. These days I could probably live quite well without one. It's the people behind them. It's the people behind the Newton, the people who are using this, the people. I have hundreds of people who have contacted me over the last 15, 20 years, and all these people, as far as I can say, were great guys. So it's really fun helping them. And the people at NewTonTalk are also great guys. It's not so much the hardware these days. It's still good, it's still usable, but the people behind it are, for me at least, more important by now.
What I took away from there was you gotta have great people.
So here we have the army of eMates. Just a small portion of my mom's collection. Yeah, there's at least 2 more boxes. She's a very creative person. She was a textile artist. She was an incredible sewer, knitter, dressmaker. When my mom first started collecting and refurbishing eMates and just getting them into her classroom, they were giving them away. You know, like they were just in the trash, and she couldn't believe it. She's like, they're just throwing these computers away, and there's so much, they can do so much. She worked tirelessly to help children in this neighborhood specifically. You know, when I was growing up, she was always involved. She was always volunteering. She was always doing something. Sorry, it's emotional for me. She just had a way with kids. She was able to connect with them on a different level. And I think that finding this technology was a huge inspiration for her, and seeing the ability that it had to connect with children who perhaps had, you know, very, very limited abilities. The fact that they could still, get this device in their hands and just tune right into it and get focused and excited about something was like really powerful for her.
If there's one thing you want us to remember about your mom, what would it be?
How much she loved the Newton. Just, how passionate she was about it, and she loved the community. She loved that there were so many people like her that were inspired by this technology.
Are you surprised that people still love and still use their Newtons?
Yeah, a little bit.
Of course, people know who Steve Jobs is and was, and so those are legendary figures. But there are people like Steve Capps who had as much impact on what became our future as any of these people who are probably more famous.
I wanted to give Steve Capps the floor just briefly to make a personal request.
If you've ever worked with me, you know I have a tendency not to ask for help. Unfortunately, we're all a little too old for this because you really want young bone marrow. But go home and get your kids to register at bethematch.org. And you're not going to help my daughter. There's 50 strangers in the world, approximately 50 to 100 we found out today, that are potential matches for her. It's just worth taking 5 minutes to do a cheek swab and sending it in.
You do a cheek swab, and there's a 1 in a million chance you're going to get called. But if you get called, you're going to save that person's life.
And we've been very lucky to influence a lot of people. But this is a way to really influence the life of one person.
Thank you.
There's some guy in Europe that has done this for my daughter, and hopefully someday we'll get to meet.
To me, sometimes I think that having looked into the ROM and the code, and I just really appreciate the genius that went into the device. And as you said, I think they were just 2 years early.
Yeah. As time got on and the products have got more collaborative, and you can't do collaboration with a Newton, you could see the writing was starting to appear on the wall.
It's harder and harder to do things with the web. So even though the app still works, the Newton still works, it's starting to go dark a little bit.
I think the people who are still using it will use it until they die, and then that's it.
I'm not sure many people still use their Newtons day to day, but a lot of people still love Newton. And I think it's because they're engaged with it. It's such a personal machine.
It's sad that eventually our Newtons will wear out and die, and then we won't have them anymore. But there's an affection, and it almost choking up here, there's an affection for it that is just hard to describe.
I think the story of the Newton is that it's fairly easy to come up with visions about technology and to figure out where it will get eventually. And it's much harder to get there. And if you're going to get there, you need a fair amount of patience.
That idea of having your whole life in this kind of flat piece of technology and you carry it with you wherever you go, that was a great idea. And that idea has taken the form of the Newton, it has taken form of the Palm, it has taken form of even iPods and stuff like that, and now it's the iPhone. The original idea was good, and we've seen it grow ever since.
Yeah, so these are the machines that we used in the 50s and 60s to make brandy. We put quite a few million liters through these tanks here. And the city declared this a national monument, so even if I wanted to remove it, I couldn't. Mm-hmm. Now I'm stuck with it. But I know that my kids don't care, and that's good. Because at some point you have to give up and say, okay, it was a nice time, but now the next generation does something else. And, drinks are just like every other product too. There's fashions, and you have right now people like gin, and a few years ago vodka was all the rage, and then it's iOS, and then it's Einstein, and then it's Newton, and then it's Android. And so times change, and at some point you just leave it in the museum.
Actually, I cannot really imagine that it will stop being part of my life. If that happens, I will probably no longer be able to hold these connections either, I think. I will probably in a retirement home or something with no room for Newton hardware. I cannot really imagine right now that this is going to end.
But then on the other hand, the device didn't stop working when it was cancelled, so it's still there. You just need to recharge the batteries.
As a proof of concept, as a proof of what could be, no, I don't think it was a failure. I think, it showed the world what computing could look like.
The kind of things that people did with the Newton back then, you couldn't do any other way.
I was invited back for the 20th anniversary of the launch of the Newton, and it was so much fun to see so many of the people who had been part of creating the Newton were still just as proud of what they had done 20 years later, and they came back with point-of-sale material and some of the first Newtons, and it was a pretty emotional event for all of us.
I've now been to a Newton Worldwide conference, and I'm confident that there are enough other people who care about the Newton as much as I do. The art of keeping the Newton working will last forever, with occasional battery changes.
Newton never dies, it just gets new batteries.
Everyone has essentially a Newton in their pocket. It's just smaller and thinner. In the future, the next 5 to 10 years, AR, photography on smartphones is just going to be utterly transformative. So I'm looking forward to the next 5 years.
There's a lot of interesting stuff that traces to foundational changes in the computer industry that all happened back with Newton.
I think it's up to some of us to keep that memory alive and say, before the iPhone, before the iPod, before the Palm Pre, there was this thing, this weird little green machine that pioneered all these kind of ideas.
It really succeeded beyond our wildest dreams in many ways, and it's still not matched by some of the products that we have today.
It doesn't matter what happens, if you love something or if you're really intrigued by something, it's going to stay around.
So what in the end keeps you coming back to the Newton stuff? You keep all this stuff.
Maybe the dream that at one point I'll sort of say, all right, that's it. Let's get this stuff going again. It was cool. And the nice thing is, when I fire it up, like I could plug in any of these right now and they will go back to what I was doing 10 years ago, and they'd be ready and happy and wagging their tails saying, let's go play.
Do you feel like there's a spiritual successor to the Newton today?
No, I'll be blunt. There are devices which can do what the Newton was probably supposed to do and do it much better, but they're not a Newton.
No, I don't think so. There never has been. The Newton has always been a kind of its own.
We would probably be able to do something, but I don't think you would capture the spirit. You would need to redo it from the ground up.
It's not just the hardware, it's the software, it's how you interact with it, it's what it looks like. Maybe it's good that the Newton doesn't do everything that current modern devices do, because then I don't think it would be a Newton anymore.
So on that definition, there can never be another Newton.
No, I don't think so.
Keep the green, as we say. Long live Newton.
hold the knowledge of the world in the palm of our hands. We see it all, everybody, but we don't understand. We hold the knowledge of the world, and you're listening to me. 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 We hold the knowledge of the world in the palm of our hands. Hold the knowledge of the world in the palm of our hands. We see it all, everybody, but we don't understand. We hold the knowledge of the world, and you're listening to me. And you're listening to me.
You've got the Newton aspect of it, you've got poutine, because that always shows up, and you've got people all over the world who wonder, what the hell is this poutine thing all about?
I think a couple of Canadians had mentioned it on the list, and everyone else was like, what's poutine? And then we had to start explaining it and explaining it and explaining it over and over again. And then I think it just became a running gag.
So you're from Canada, aren't you? Yes. You know what poutine is? Yes. I envy you. Yeah, we should definitely. This is what has held NewTontalk alive over the decades.